Hello, and thanks for joining us today. I'm super excited you could be here because today we are going to help you build an effective and efficient and profitable real estate business. We're actually going to help you in a lot of different areas, especially fix and flips. And with us to help make this happen as well, one of A&E's most popular stars. So with us today is Jamil Damji. Now, Jamil is a nationally recognized real estate investor, entrepreneur, and educator with a passion for empowering others to create generational wealth through real estate. Now, as the co-founder of KeyGlee, the largest wholesale real estate operation in the United States, Jamil has helped scale the business to 118 markets and counting, make it a powerhouse in the industry. Now, in addition to his success with KeyGlee, Jamil is also the visionary behind AstroFlipping, a thriving community of over 4,000 real estate investors from around the globe. Now, this community has collectively generated tens of millions of dollars in profits, with Jamil providing guidance, mentorship, and strategic framework that helps members thrive in the world of real estate wholesaling. Now, Jamil's expertise and engaging personality also earned him a spot on the national television as the host of A&E's popular show, The Triple Digit Flip, where he flips houses while sharing his wit and wisdom with viewers. Whether on screen or in person, Jamil's mission is clear: to teach others how to profit in real estate while maintaining integrity, ethics, and balance in their personal and professional lives. Jamil, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, man, I'm really excited you could be here. So let me ask you this: like, what got you in? So you're really a specialty in a lot of different stuff, but what is a part of real estate that you specialize and enjoy doing the most?
Well, I cut my teeth in the world of wholesaling. And for those who are unfamiliar with what wholesaling is, that's where we find a property that's in distressed condition. You can recognize these in your neighborhoods where, they're boarded up. Maybe there was, like a hoarding situation going on in there, but they're typically vacant and not habitable. And those properties tend to become eyesores in the neighborhood and devalue property. And so my specialty is finding those abandoned or those unloved properties and placing them with investors who will then fix and flip those properties and make them beautiful and put them back into the retail market. So for me, my favorite strategy is wholesaling because it minimizes the risk. I don't have to necessarily buy the property and flip it myself. I can get contractual rights to purchase the house, and then I sell those rights to another investor for a fee. And that's what I created my business model on. So we do anywhere between 60 to 100 of those contract flips in my corporate store, and then nationally hundreds of those every single month. And you can make profits on, anywhere between $10,000 to $50,000 on one single contract flip. And so it's a very lucrative strategy. It de-risks in the situation that you're not really holding anything. So if the market turns on you for whatever reason, you're not going to be exposed. And it's a great beginner strategy because it doesn't require you to have a tremendous amount of cash investment to get involved in it. So that's where I, got started in the real estate space. I still wholesale because it's an easy way to create value. And it lets me find the best projects to fix and flip myself. So I'll pass on other deals to other investors. And then when I find the one that really speaks to me, I'll buy that one and flip that one myself. So essentially, I monetize the deals that I pass on.
So I love everything you said. Is it accurate that maybe you make about 10% of the sales price potentially in profit for a wholesale deal? Is that I've heard
Um,
that the other day, and I don't know if
not
that number is any accurate.
not on a wholesale deal. On a flip, somewhere between 10 and 15% is where we're averaging out right now. And on a wholesale deal, my average profit on a wholesale contract flip will be about $10,000 to $15,000 per deal.
So about 10 to 50K per deal. Now,
Yeah.
when you go into a wholesale deal like this to begin with, and you said very little money out of pocket. So typically what's being asked for is the money in the earnest deposit, right? The
Correct.
person you're buying it from, that's the money you're exchanging.
Correct. Yeah. And so the EMD, earnest deposit, is typically the amount of cash outlay that you need to get into one of these things. But there's ways to defer the deposit of an earnest money until after you pass your inspection period. So you can structure these contracts in such a way where if you really are strapped for cash and you don't even have the $1,000 or $2,000 to put down as an earnest deposit, you can make it such that your EMD isn't due until you waive your contingencies. Now, typically what happens in a wholesale deal is you sell the contract during your inspection period or your contingency time. And so if you're successful in lining up a buyer for your contract, you can have the buyer deposit the earnest money, and now you're into the deal for nothing.
And typically you're lining up those buyers before you're even going in. I mean, you have a massive, audience of students. So that's probably what you're instructing them is to line up your buyers before you even go in to make an offer on the property.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things that we do well at KeyGlee is we've built some incredible relationships across the nation with fix and flip, mom and pop shops, hedge funds, different types of real estate investors looking for these types of devalued or undervalued opportunities. And they're waiting. They're essentially waiting for us to get something good under contract. And then when we do have one, we just send it out on an email blast and the bidding begins.
I love KeyGlee. That name is cool.
It's a fun one. Yeah.
I mean, I don't want my ADHD to take me to a sidetrack, but who came up with that name? Did you come up with that name?
Funny that you ask. So, my ex-wife and I will probably have different answers. I think she thinks she did it. I feel like I did, but maybe it was the two of us. But what happened was we were really struggling with finding a name that we could get a good domain for, So if you've ever tried to buy a domain from GoDaddy, you'll find that anything that's single word is gone, right? Or tens of thousands of dollars. And so we figured out that maybe we don't have to use a real word, right? Maybe we can make a word up. And so we thought about what do we do, right? What is the essence of our business? And it really is trading your keys and making yourself happy, right? So we took Glee, put them together, and there you have it.
I love it. I love that. And
Yeah.
when we talk, we help a lot of businesses set their business up properly. It's the same thing I said. If you want a good company name, you got to choose something that means nothing to anybody. Then you can get the domain, and then it's something cool. But KeyGlee, the way that those two go together, I just think it's brilliant. And the underlying meaning, you could tell keys, glee. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. It's wholesome, it's neat, and it gets the message across. So all boxes checked.
Yeah, so lesson to everybody watching this, because this is a really good strategy to be able to come up with your company name if you don't have one for one that you're launching. So that being said, back to wholesaling. When you're buying the property, and you've got a tentative buyer lined up. So when you're evaluating it, how are you evaluating? I mean, how do you teach? I know how it's going to be different. So let me rephrase the question. How does you teach a student to properly evaluate, to know that there's enough room in that property to be able to know what to buy it for, so they don't make a mistake on that first contract?
What a great question, Ty. So the thing that I really pride myself on is my capacity to value property. So what I essentially did early on in my career was I went to appraisal school and I learned how to appraise a home the way an appraiser would. And then I interviewed 100 appraisers and I found out what were the common attributes, the common values, the things that lined up between myself and these 100 appraisers. What were the meat and potato items that we were looking at in order to determine value? And what I was able to do was come up with a framework. And that framework is what I call my appraisal rules. And when you use these appraisal rules, you're essentially going by the guidelines of how an appraiser would value the property. And you can do this when you commit the appraisal rules to memory, which I essentially have. What it allows you to do is get really, really dialed in on what a property would be worth once it's fixed up. So I teach people how to do that. I use some free software like Zillow, or you can even get paid software that mimics the MLS, whatever you're interested in. But Zillow is just as good. And I can show people how to take a look at the property that you have as a subject and how to extrapolate what it could become with a renovation. And so we're looking for what's called an after repair value, an ARV. And so as long as we stay within the same subdivision, the same property type, plus or minus 250 square feet in size, plus or minus 10 years of construction year date, and we have these things, it's like the way I like to think about it is that if I'm going to compare two apples, They can't just be the same apple. They've got to be two apples grown from the same tree in the same orchard by the same farmer in the same season. And when you can get those commonalities, it gets the accuracy of the value of that subject property to become pretty precise. And so I teach that. I do a YouTube live stream called Straight Outta Compton. Had some fun with it because of the movie and the old 1990s NWA rap song. And so I do a stream where I show people, they bring an address and they put the address into my YouTube comments. And then I'll show them how I would value that property. And I walk through the different things that I'm looking at, thinking about, and then I create for them what I believe the after repair value would be. And then once you know what the after repair value is, you have to determine what it would cost to get you there. Right. And so that will help you determine what your buy price should be.
So, do you help your students with this? Do they have access to that framework and the tools that you're using?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So if I'm sitting here going, oh, that makes a lot of sense because I don't want to interview 100 appraisers and I don't want to, I don't know, go to appraisal school, let alone the vast experience that you have, then I can go to KeyGlee. And one of the benefits that I'm getting there is that you're helping me with the framework to make sure I'm buying the property right.
Correct. The key here is that something has to be a deal in order for somebody to want to buy it, right? Not every property is a wholesale deal. And that's something that people have to keep in mind, right? We're not in the business of taking equity from people. If a home is beautiful or retail ready, it's not typically for me, right? Because that's a home that I think would be better served sold on the MLS through a real estate agent to a retail buyer getting a retail loan. The kinds of homes that I typically go after are ones that aren't even financeable by traditional lenders. So these homes need to be purchased with cash or hard money. And because of that, we can get a better discount or a better deal on that property. And so that's the framework in which we make our purchases. And we have to be pretty clear on what it's going to take to get this property from here to there in order to be profitable, A, as a wholesale transaction, but B, for your end buyer to then make money on their flip.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense because I think about that in the back of my head, even though I haven't asked. I'm like, how do you get real estate agents to play along? Like I'm in Florida, so in your Phoenix, so the demand is not, it's pretty good demand for properties. We're in both
Sure.
of our areas. So if I'm trying to go in and I want to do this and do that and do that, these real estate agents are going to take another offer. But if I'm coming and buying a distressed property, there's not as much demand for that property. So more than likely, it's easier to get concessions from the seller and from the agent to make that deal work.
Correct. And oftentimes, if you do it right, so one of the things that I teach and the framework of how I generate leads is by creating relationships with real estate agents so that you get to take a look at the property before they ever list it on the MLS. And so what you become is the go-to cash investor for an agent when they come across a home like that. Now, the reality is when a homeowner has gotten to that situation where they've got a home and it's in such distress that you can't traditionally finance it, there's usually a situational distress accompanying the property distress as well. And so these sellers are typically looking for a fast solution. And so the more convenient I can make my offer, the quicker I can make my closing, the more convenience that I can provide to the seller and the real estate agent, the more likely they are to want to do a deal with me. And the reality is for the most part, these folks don't want their houses listed on the MLS for the entire world to see. There was a home I bought not too far from where I live here in Phoenix. Sad story. The children had left, moved to another state. Mother had passed away a decade ago. Father was living in the house and had developed a mental illness where he was collecting feces. I know this is not probably what people want to hear, but it's the truth. This is what happened to the poor guy. And, the kids hadn't really come to visit him in a long time. And ultimately, he passes away. And when the kids finally got to the home and they saw what had happened to dad, they were heartbroken. They were absolutely heartbroken. And they couldn't then take that home and put it on the MLS so that the entire neighborhood could see what happened to dad in the last decade of his life, right? They were embarrassed. They were embarrassed for him. They were embarrassed for themselves. And they wanted it to be a quiet, quick sale. And so one of the conditions that they sold me the home with was that I was not allowed to allow anybody that was either, related to the neighborhood, or anyone else for that matter to come in and see the home until I had already beautified it. Right. And so that was a deal that I made for them. They sold me the house at a great price. I did a great job on the remodel, and they were so happy that that home became, went back into the retail market for another home, another family to come in and build a life and memories and have love in. But this is just what happens sometimes in people's world. And so when they sought me out, they wanted to have somebody that they knew would have discretion in the situation, that would comply with what their hopes were for how to manage the sensitivity of the subject of the home purchase, and then to just do a great job. And so I gave them the maximum that I could give them given the condition of the home. So they were super happy with the price. And then I was able to make a modest profit once I flipped it. So it was a win-win situation for me, win-win situation for the seller, and for the real estate agent who didn't necessarily want to be touring that house over and over and over again.
Makes a little bit of time, I imagine, takes to get the credibility you have. So that being said, yeah. I'm sure a lot of your students come in with, oh, it won't work for me type of mentality. So what are some other strategies you teach them outside of relationships to go and find the right wholesale properties to buy?
Well, there's a couple of ways to do this. You can go directly to homeowners, and you could go through real estate agents, right? Those are the two main sources of finding deals, in my opinion, right? And so one of the ways you could do is go find lists of people who own rental properties and talk to folks who've owned rental properties for 5 or 10 years and find out if they're still happy with owning a rental property. You'd be surprised at how many mom and pop real estate investors buy a rental property and just get in over their heads with repairs and all of the issues, and they just couldn't be bothered with wanting to keep it another day. And all of a sudden they get a phone call from a nice real estate investor who is interested in buying their property for cash and take this problem off their hands. And there you have it. You can create a deal there. Sometimes I go to the county court office and I look at probates. So I go and find out who's passed away and who's the personal representative of a probate. And then I reach out to that personal representative and let them know that I'm a resource. If they want to sell the house quickly for a cash price, I could be of service to them. So that's a great way for me to get a good lead. I also pull lists of people who may have had a life situation that no longer requires them to own the home that they're in any longer. For instance, empty nesters, they tend to hold on to properties a little too long sometimes. And so you've got these people in middle age, children have left the house, but they're living in these 3,000 square foot homes with 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. And it's just 2 of them. And so they've got all of these rooms that they're just storing belongings in now that are becoming kind of wasteful for them, where they could take that money that they've got trapped in that home and go and have a completely different experience in life right now. And so looking at life situations is a great way to approach this type of strategy. Again, situational distress is also a great way to find good leads. So bankruptcies, divorces, code violations, people who are in over their head with HOA violations and city liens and city taxes, tax deeds, tax liens as well. People who get majorly behind on their taxes is a great way to get people out of that situation and take possession of a property at a great price. And so there's a number of different lead sources for this type of deal. One of the things that why I don't necessarily go through directly to a homeowner is I like having a real estate agent involved so that they can be an advocate for the homeowner to make sure that everything is above board and that everyone's being honest. The reality is there's something to be said about a real estate agent's fiduciary duty to a seller to get them the best situation. Now, best situation doesn't mean numbers. It doesn't mean just price. Sometimes it has to do with closing dates. Sometimes it has to do with, I just want to leave all the items in the home behind. I don't want to have to deal with any of the dumping. Or maybe they need a post possession. They need to stay in the home 60 days after close so that they can get their affairs in order. Whatever that is, I can structure that and help that homeowner get the best situation for them as possible. And when they have an advocate like a real estate agent involved in the deal, it just helps everybody make sure that everything is going the way that it's supposed to be going. So I prefer working through real estate agents just for a liability standpoint and to make sure that everybody's being taken care of in the appropriate way. But that doesn't mean that I won't necessarily just buy directly from a homeowner. I just think that you open yourself up to more issues and, potential liability going directly to a homeowner who may not be educated on price and understand what the value is of the property that they're selling. So for me, it's just I prefer real estate agents, but there's a lot of wholesalers that go directly to the seller as well.
Any advice on finding the right real estate agents?
you know, all real estate agents come across this type of home. And so one of the things I don't do is filter through who I should talk to and who I shouldn't. The reality is that even the agent who maybe sells 3 or 4 houses a year eventually will get their hands on one of these types of homes. And they are even less aware of what to do with that type of property when they get their hands on it. So for me, I cast a wide net when I'm talking to agents, and I develop those relationships. And, because I perform on the promises that I make and the contracts that I write, I become a go-to person for them in whatever market that I'm working in. But for a strategy for people, if you were watching this podcast and thinking, hey, this sounds like a pretty decent approach, what could I do here? Well, one of the best sources for potential leads is the MLS. So you can go onto Zillow and you can look at properties that have been maybe sitting on the market 60, 90, 100 days and look through the pictures. And if the home looks dated or distressed in any way, then what that means is that the real estate agent or the sellers have overpriced that home. The market's rejected the number that they've put on this price. And so there's motivation that's starting to brew there. Now, the real estate agent knows the home is overpriced, and they're probably just acting on the seller's behest to price it at that number. And so they're waiting for the seller to come to reality. And the seller needs a little bit of prodding to get to that spot. And so my favorite strategy in getting these is going after a stale listing that's sitting on the MLS for like 100 days and just asking the realtor, I'm looking at this property. I see that you've got it priced at, let's just, make a hypothetical here. You've got it priced at $300,000. And so I started looking around in the neighborhood and I found that $300,000 would be the right number for this house if somebody had renovated it fully. And I think it's going to take 80 grand to get to that number, judging on the pictures that you've posted here online. And so there's a big gap between where you're listed and what this property is worth. So the question here is, who drove price? Was it you or the seller? And quite often they'll just be honest. My client was really wishful that they'll get a really great price, but they know they're overpriced and they're just waiting for somebody to write an offer. Wonderful. I'm the guy. I'm the guy who's going to give you an offer today. Now, it's not going to be anywhere near where you're listed at, but I think you know that. But it's going to be fair and it's going to be realistic. How quickly does your seller want to close? Because I want to factor that into my numbers. And so I put together a strong case for why my price is where it's at, and I make a presentation. And 1 out of every 10 times it sticks.
How do you make the decision between wholesaling and fix and flip? Because I'd imagine you're in the know. You've got all these people sitting in these opportunities. Some of them are wholesaling, you're just moving, and then you find the one you love. And that's the one, as you're describing, you fix and flip. How do you determine which one that you really love and want to fix and flip versus wholesale?
Well, there's a few factors, right? So there's sometimes I make the judgment based on architectural features. Like I'm a sucker for a mid-century modern home. And so if I can get my hands on something that was designed by a famous mid-century architect like Ralph Haver or Al Beadle, then I will buy that home and flip it myself because I just nerd out on that kind of renovation. But other times it's just convenience. How far of a drive is it from me to my home? And is there enough profit margin in here for it to be worth my time? And so I make the decision based off of potential profit. I make the decision based off of my own personal interests. And then lastly, just distance from where I live.
When somebody's getting into fix and flipping, I would imagine the one thing that would scare me being new to it would be I don't know what my true costs are going to be to fix this thing up. Like I would imagine that's the problem that a lot of your students deal with. How do you help them get over that hump to get enough confidence to really to get out there and make the first jump into fix and flip?
Well, funny enough, I track rehab costs across the nation. And so I provide for the students in my community a pretty solid dollar per square foot estimate on where renovations will be if it's a cosmetic job and where renovation costs will be if it's a full gut. And outside of California and New York and some other areas in the north and southeast there, I'm pretty accurate on what those numbers tend to be. And because we're always paying attention to pricing, that number is dynamic and typically changes, by the quarter, but it's pretty close. And so if we can give a good ballpark estimate on where we think the renovation will come in based on square footage and condition, then that just allows us to input a pretty standardized number into our calculation so that we can make offers fast. Now, of course, during your inspection, you're going to get into the meat and potatoes of what things are actually going to be. So not only will your buyers be bringing in their contractors, but if you decide you may want to flip it yourself, you may go and get some bids yourself. And then you can see how close the estimate was to where the numbers actually came in. So that makes a great opportunity to, to determine where the costs are. But I think when you're first getting started, it's really important to learn from somebody who's done this. Speak to fix and flippers in your neighborhood or in your state and local market. Go to networking events and talk to people who are in the business and ask them, where are you coming in right now, dollar per square foot on a cosmetic remodel? And a lot of people would be happy to tell you. You can ask them, where are you coming in, dollar per square foot on new construction? And they'll be happy to tell you. You can also ask, where are you coming in on your dollar per square foot on a full gut remodel? And again, they'll be happy to tell you. You'd be surprised at how sharing real estate investors can be with one another when you get them in the right environment and you ask the right questions. People love being asked their opinion, and people love sharing their expertise when you give them the opportunity to do so. So get out there and ask questions.
You have a phenomenal supportive community, and you talk about when we've talked a little bit about avoiding mistakes. What is one of the worst you've seen? Like somebody that comes into you, because there's so many things that can go wrong here. And that's why you have your community, right? You provide the guidance, the tools, the
Correct.
resources, the mentorship, everything somebody needs to avoid the mistakes and cut the line and succeed. So what's a horror story that you've heard or seen? Maybe you, maybe somebody else, but that didn't know what they were doing and came in and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened, where your training would have helped them avoid that mess.
I think the most common mistake, and I don't necessarily think it's a horror story, but I think it's where wholesalers, it's like the wholesaler graveyard, right? It's where the ambitions and the hopes die, is when somebody doesn't come in and really take seriously the numbers and understand where value should be at. They're not spending enough time really learning how to comp a property, understanding where property needs to be bought at in order for it to be a wholesale deal or a good fix and flip. And they just try throwing spaghetti at the wall. Now, what ends up happening when that happens is they lock up contracts too high. And then they get themselves into a pickle with a real estate agent who's upset with them. And, the wheels fall off and they feel terrible because they have to cancel the deal. Now, typically, they're not going to lose any money on that because if you cancel during your inspection period, you'll get your earnest deposit back. But what ends up happening is they fail. And in that failure, they lose confidence. And after a couple times of doing that, they give up. And that's a shame, because if they had just spent some time really understanding value and really taking this craft seriously, like it's a skill, right? Learning how to value property is a skill. And you wouldn't tell somebody to go frame a house if they didn't understand how to be a framer. If they didn't learn the skill, why would you try doing it? So one of the skills you need to learn when you're wholesaling homes is how to value property. And if you're just going to come in and start making phone calls and writing offers willy-nilly, well, you missed the point. You haven't gained that really important skill that's going to help you succeed at the business. And so when you've canceled contracts and you start to get frustrated because nothing's working, it's your own fault. And that's what I see 80% of wholesalers doing. And that's why they quit. right? And so the really good ones are the ones who they spend time learning how to value, they make mistakes, they screw it up a few times, but they know that eventually they're going to get it right. And the more practice and the more reps that they do, the closer and closer and closer they're going to be to getting these numbers right. And then eventually something clicks. And then once it clicks, and then once they get consistent on their lead generation and they get consistent on the number of offers they're putting out on a daily basis, and they get consistent on communicating and building relationships with buyers, what ends up happening is a business forms, and then their lives change. And so if people can just learn the techniques, learn the tools, and then have some consistency and know that it's not going to be, nothing is easy. Nothing worthwhile is just going to fall out of the sky and be a cakewalk to do. What I do is difficult. It takes time, takes effort, it takes tenacity and consistency. But if you put the work in, you can build a business where you're making, $50,000 to $100,000 a month and not taking any risks. For me, that's a great life.
It's interesting because if I take, and by the way, phenomenal advice. I mean, if I listen to what you just said and I replaced real estate with running a business or starting a business, it's exactly the same thing. I mean, like if you're watching this, I really suggest that you literally go back 2 minutes and start over what he just said, because what he's describing is exactly where entrepreneurs fail. I mean, spot on, exactly what happens. And that advice is so telltale. I mean, literally, like my hair stands up on my arm, because it's like you literally described why business owners fail at whatever they're doing. And then you followed it up with the exact path that you need to take to succeed. So it means a lot that you say that, because everybody watching here today is an entrepreneur.
Thank you. Yeah. And these parallels are true, right? I think one more thing that not a lot of people talk about, but I don't fear doing it. I think that there's a connection between the spirit and your success in entrepreneurship. And there's a lot that you can do from the inside that will reflect on the outside. And so, for me, I was able to take the journey inward because of entrepreneurship. It's what led me to practices like meditation and breath work, visualization. And those practices have accelerated my life and accelerated my success to a degree that I can't explain. And so I invite people who are curious, about why they're here, what their purpose is, and how they may be able to do more with less. Maybe it's not outside that you need to look. Maybe you got to go in.
That's powerful. Jamil, a lot of people are watching this and they want to learn more. They want to know what next steps are to get started. So what should they do? Where should they go to be able to get more insight?
Well, I put out content on my YouTube channel. It's just youtube.com/Jamil Damji. That's JamilDamji. You can subscribe to my channel there and learn what I do. You can also follow me on Instagram at JDAMJI. That's at JDamji on Instagram. Send me a DM and I'm happy to get you started. I've got some playlists on my YouTube channel that are great beginner frameworks to get your feet wet in the business. And then once you've made a determination that this is something that you'd like to pursue, then at that time, I think it's important to get involved in the community. But before that, I think, see if this is something that makes sense for you. See if this is something that excites you. Because at the end of the day, if you're not having fun doing it, it's not worth doing. We spend too much time in life doing activities that don't interest us. That's got to stop. So figure out if this is for you. And if it is, I'd love to hear from you.
Jamil, thank you so much for coming in and sharing with us today.
Thank you, Ty.
All right, so listen, if you're watching this, I'm going to have to ask Jamil if he can come back. I don't want to put him on the spot. But the reason for that is that really my topic today was about growing and scaling. And we didn't even get a chance to do that. And that's where he's masterful. It's just he had so much insight on flipping and on wholesaling that we dove in deep there, and there's so much more that we could be able to cover. So besides having him come back, which I hope that he will, I want you to go to astroflipping.com as well. If you go to astroflipping.com and go to the bottom, in less than a minute you can find his social media channels and you can like right there. You can go in and like and subscribe, and I recommend that you do that because he's got phenomenal training on all of his channels. But even his website, he starts to map out his 3-step formula where you can build a 6-figure plus business in real estate. You can grab an ebook that he's got. You can see actual real case studies and results that people have. You can access courses amongst many other things. So it's just a really easy place to go. Spend less than 1 minute just liking and subscribing to his channels to start getting his regular tips. And then on top of that, you're also able to access the courses and everything else that you'd want to be able to take a next step. So make sure you go to astroflipping.com. He also gave you his direct social media channels. You can go there as well, and go to astroflipping.com and go to the bottom of the page. You can access some of those right there. So make sure you do this. Look, a lot of people want to break into real estate investing, but the reality is a lot of them don't have the money. So again, this is an easy way to do it. You're able to come in, you're able to evaluate deals, you're able to see what you can do at a wholesale deal to make a $10,000 or $15,000 in money. Then you're able to see what you could do to fix and flip and make more money. Then I imagine what Jamil is doing a lot of is then taking that money and invest into other things in other areas of real estate that take money to invest in. So this is a great way to get started, a great way to make your initial money that you're going to use to get into other kind of real estate you may want to dive into as well. So make sure you check it out at AstroFlipping.com. That's astroflipping.com. And by the way, make sure you also look up Jamil's information online. You can find his social channels also by searching his name, which is Jamil, Jamil Damji, which is Damji. So make sure you check that out as well. And I thank you very much for tuning in, and I look forward to talking to you on our next episode. Take care. Have a great day.